Welcome everybody to another edition of Client-Side Chats. Today we're going to be going through Client-Side Chats, future-proofing through digital transformation. We have a wonderful event set up today. So I want to go ahead and start off by just answering a few questions about what you've signed up for. Client-Side Chats provides a platform for Savas Labs and our clients to showcase their ways in which we've collaborated together so that we can share our industry knowledge and expertise to help others learn about new technologies and tactics to support their organizations, understand the processes and pitfalls within implementing them, and really to build a network of like-minded professionals looking to make an impact using technology. So let's learn a little bit more about what we're going to be talking about here today. We have an executive discussion between two business leaders who are intimately familiar with digital transformation. We're going to be covering topics from what constitutes digital transformation in today's age to how do I find a transformation partner and everything in between. So before that, I want to answer a few questions about Savas Labs. Savas Labs is a highly skilled team of designers, developers, and consultants that build digital products that create meaningful impact. We're an agency based out of Raleigh, North Carolina, but are distributed throughout the United States. And we love taking on projects just like the ones that we're going to be talking about today. So let me introduce our two speakers. Ben Eckerson is the COO of Savas Labs. With more than 15 years of industry experience, Ben is a creative catalyst whose innate curiosity and enthusiasm inspires team members and clients alike to produce the most imaginative and powerful work possible. He began his digital career at McKinney, creating fully integrated advertising campaigns for brands including Virgin Atlantic, Nationwide Insurance, Mizuno USA, NASDAQ, Travelocity, and Audi. Ben, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me here on the Savas Labs webinar series.
Yes, and joining Ben is Michael Tatham, President and CEO of Tatham Company. For over 18 years, Michael has worked with some of the world's outstanding visionary leaders, helping them bring their teams together to solve their industry's biggest challenges. Clients include NASA, Walmart, Bank of America, Hewlett-Packard, IBM, and the U.S. Air Force. And for over 50 years, Tatham Company has been instrumental in assisting their clients in achieving both agility and adaptability. This mobilizes the necessary mindset, method, and systems required to ignite, launch, lead, and sustain growth. Michael, thanks for joining us as well.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
All right, everybody. I'd like to be able to line out a little bit of what today actually looks like. So first, just a quick agenda. We're going to be learning a little bit more about Michael, Tatham Company, and their digital transformation experience in just a second. And then we're really going to spend most of the time today going through an executive level discussion between Ben and Michael on that digital transformation topic. And it's something that you're going to have a lot of fun with. There's a great amount of content there that we're going to be touching on. During that time, though, if you ever have any questions, we are going to be saving the last 5 to 10 minutes for a Q&A with the. So use that questions tool inside of Zoom. We'll batch all of those up. And at the end, we'll jump on here for answering anything that you have in place. So keep that up. If you have anything right now that you want answered, throw it in there. If it comes up during that conversation, that's where we'll hit it. And then we'll finally wrap everything up at the end with just a few resources to help you take any of the ideas that we discuss here today and actually implement them moving forward. So with that, I'm going to step away. I'm going to hand things over to Michael to give you a little bit of a rundown on his background and what brought us together today, and then we'll jump right in.
Great. Thanks so much. Okay, so background. I'm going to keep it short and simple. So I came right out of university, said I worked for Nike, and it was about 6-7 months into working for Nike, I got fired very quickly. And at that point, I think I realized I don't think I'm going to be able to work in a large organization with all the command and control and bureaucracy. It was frustrating. I felt like a lot of the ideas that I had to help the company and help the customer, they just weren't being listened to. And I think it was really at that moment that I realized that I wanted to develop an organization, be part of an organization that would give a voice to those like myself. When I was working for Nike, to be able to have some of these amazing ideas that I have actually get translated into, ways of operating. So really that is where Tatham and my passion from Tatham came from. And I think the transformation that we've gone through is not just one. It's not just a digital transformation. We've gone through multiple iterations, because before Tatham company. I was working for my father, who had started a business called Tatham Process Engineering. It was a process engineering company, and so that went through multiple iterations and pivots over the years. And we've been in over 50 years. Tatham's been around, but the most recent one being COVID. I think all businesses can relate to what COVID has done, not just to becoming digital, but changing the way we work in general. Was frightening for me. It wasn't like a recession. It wasn't like anything else. Or 9/11, for example, like any of those types of big events that have affected businesses all over the world. And not to mention in our business, like we've always been known as like grassroots and very interactive and experiential and face-to-face. Like that was our business. And that's how you build trust with the types of clients we have. So it was a scary time trying to get through that. And if you can't find a partner to help you through that transformation, then you really risk going out of business. And so that, I think, would be a good way to introduce all of this. Ben?
Sure. Yeah. No, I think that the transformation that we helped you all make, I think, is a notable one, right? So, I think it's worth maybe talking a little bit about what Tatham was like pre-Savas Labs, and then our partnership and where it sort of has evolved to today, and COVID being a catalyst for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the quickest way to describe what we do, because it's always a challenge to do so, is that we use experiential learning to really start with the ignition to change within our clients. And we have, if you heard from some of the customers we worked for over the years, if you don't have the right mindset going into change, and that everyone across the organization is aligned in how you're going to make that change and what success looks like, it's very difficult. So our flagship product that we've had for so many years that we built with Hewlett Packard way back in the day is an experience called Bootcamp. And we've had hundreds of thousands of people go through it and change mindsets, and it's residential, so face-to-face. And just to give you a quick explanation as to what actually Bootcamp is, it's a business simulator that goes through the transformation of an organization that would take roughly 3 years. And it's role-playing. So you're actually sitting in a room with your team and you're running this business, and there's a product that you're making, there's customer that has requirements, and all the roles that need to come together as part of this organization to be able to function and to generate revenue and be successful. And so we bring the executive teams through, and not just executive teams, all sorts of teams, but we start with executive teams. And so they come in with their team, and it's a face-to-face, there's a physical setup, and they go through this huge transformation, and it shows this evolution of the business, and they participate in actually redesigning it themselves. It's not us at Tatham saying, here's what you do poorly and here's what you need to do better. We coach them through and guide them through this experience where they change their business. They change this business in 2 days. So they're walking out with a, holy crap, we can do this. It's not as complex as we thought. And we actually have a roadmap and a blueprint on how to do this. So I'm thinking immediately, as soon as COVID hits, I'm like, oh crap. Like, how are we going to take something that's been built over 35, 40 years? How are we going to take this thing and put it online? And every client I talk to and associate and anyone in my network, they're like, oh man, I have no idea how you're going to pull that off. Right. And it's funny because some of my first ideas as to how I would get this thing to become virtual, because the demand was there. I had 5 or 6 clients immediately, right when they heard that there was a lockdown, saying, oh, well, we're running your program. What are we going to do? And I was like, I don't know, but I'm going to figure it out. And so I really didn't know what to do. My first piece of advice would be to anyone who's in a similar situation when you're thinking about digital is, number one, it's good to have something that you know already that your customers value. So they're like, yes, this is a part of the offering we love. We're willing to pay for it. You're helping us solve a problem. Then you can start to think to, how do I enable that? Like, how do I bring it into a digital space without losing the essence of where that value is? And so that's where Savas, and I had interviewed quite a few different firms to partner with. I just felt right with Savas. It felt like, I'm running a family business, and I felt like they empathized with my situation. They understood my circumstance, and it wasn't like a cookie cutter approach. It was very customized, and it was very There was tons of transparency, so I knew exactly what the journey was going to look like. And the best part of all is no one knew what the final product was going to look like. But the part that I loved about working with Savas is that even though you didn't know what it looked like, you were super excited, almost more than I was, about the challenge, right? And that gave this sense of confidence, I think, that I didn't have at that time. And it made it very clear to me with the 6 or 7 other firms I had in the pipeline. I just said, forget them. I mean, Savas, I'm going with you guys for that single reason, right? And so translating this experience to a digital experience, because it is experiential. Again, I had no idea. It was like completely in the dark on how that was going to work. Sorry, Ben, you're going to say something.
Right. No, I think it's right for the topic that we're talking about here, right? And so I think that one of the things that motivates the folks, our team specifically here, is solving interesting problems, right? And to me, in many ways, I would say that our work with you is on a very short list of the most interesting problems to solve, right? You talk about a company that's made their livelihood and has their secret sauce on being in person with companies and having tough conversations around how change can happen, whether that's digital transformation or any type of transformation within an organization. Very highly successful corporations that you're having these discussions with, right? And so the fact that you have to take a very proven, successful analog experience that the success is hinged on being together and in person, right? And then make that a digital experience that still delivers on all of the ideals in that you, in many ways, function and operate on. It's an interesting problem to solve, and I think it's something that, in your case and maybe in others, certainly felt the need to do so quickly given COVID. I do think that COVID has also, in some ways, that what you may have been pushed into do, I think others now are, other organizations are now seeing the writing on the wall with others on being able to take a step of digital transformation. So I would say, the case of defining digital transformation, I think it's clear in your case, but how, when you were thinking about it, and you obviously interface with a lot of executives, how would you define digital transformation at large?
Well, it's kind of, I'm trying to think of the appropriate word. It's a split for me, because a big aspect of our methodology is around getting the systems, when I say systems, I mean ways of operating. I should say that with digital.
Sure.
Like the analog systems, the operating procedures, getting those capable first, right? And you just pointed that out, that like we have a product that customers want, that they've used for many years, and it has value because they're willing to purchase it, right? And it's not just a product, it's an experience. So it's important for me, like when I'm thinking through this, I'm like, the digital is an enabler, right? I don't try to think of it as the driver. Like I don't go immediately to digital as a solution. I think of digital as an add-on or an enabler to something that's already there, that's a good experience. And so I used to say to our clients all the time, when you have a problem, don't think that the technology silver bullet is going to solve everything, right? And if you think, some people get lucky, they build apps and they work well, but think about all the people who build, developers, a lot of them who build these apps that don't go anywhere, right? So what is it about what you're building? And so for me, that digital transformation was all about timing. If you had asked me to build out something like this that I had never had any type of foundation for, and said, let's just go do it, I don't think it would have been as successful at all. So that's the way I would kind of position it.
Yeah, what you bring up, I think, I don't want to get too meta here, but when you think about bringing in pieces of software that can help with process and not being the silver bullet, I do think that there's also been a bit of pressure at large to create more white label software as a service tools that can be used industry wide. And I know you spoke about some of the reason why you went with us was, it felt like a custom solution to you. And I do wonder that, I think about, when you're thinking about, as an organization, buying a tool set or selecting an off-the-shelf tool to solve a certain need, there's a certain level of buy-in that you need to have within the organization. There's also a level of sort of, I don't want to say familiarity, but you need to know how to use the tool the best that you can. So I'm interested to hear you just, I'm sure you've heard various stories when organizations are considering digital transformation, there's either the bespoke piece of software or digital solution that is specific to them that usually is more of an investment than one that would, hey, this thing exists already, we can use it, it might solve a certain subset of 100% of our problems. What sort of advice would you give, executives there, or folks from an operations perspective considering those?
Probably get in trouble for saying this one. So because I'm working with Fortune 500 companies, if I look at the hundreds of millions of dollars spent on technology, I would say more than often, and just as recently as a client of mine who invested in Salesforce, it's very off the shelf, put it in place, but there's no actual capable process in place. So it's like, oh, well, it's great because I'm going to invest in this Salesforce, which Salesforce is a great software. But again, depending on how you're bringing it in and what you've got prior to it and how it's customized, that could really dictate the output, right? And so by building in and making a huge investment in something like that, there's a few things that happen. One, if you don't have a capable analog process in place, which means when we're selling, if instead of putting it into Salesforce, it goes into a spreadsheet, and yes, that information we use helps us as part of the sales process, then it's an easy transition to Salesforce, right? But if you're like, oh, now we've got all these fields to fill out, so I'm just going to go check the boxes because that's what the software told me to do because we spent $100 million on Salesforce, that may not be capable, right? So from that perspective, and no one wants to hear this, especially a CTO, it's like, I just pulled the trigger on this big piece of software that's off the shelf and it works for everyone else because the whole world's using it. It should be working for us. We need to make sure you're following it. And I think that kind of way of doing it can be dangerous. Sometimes it works, but I'd say for the most part, for at least clients I've worked with, it doesn't work well. So especially for adoption, I don't like to use that word, but if you want your teams to adopt the technology, they need to see a few things. Number one, that it's not completely transforming everything they're doing that's worked up to this point. That's the first thing. And then secondly, they need to know that there's a collaborative nature to it. So it's like, so if these things are working and I've gotten trained on it, but I'm like, look, this doesn't fit how we sell. And so can we change it? And if the answer comes back no, because this is how we've purchased it, then you start putting in these restrictions. And what do people do? They work around the system. And then you've purchased this wonderful system that nobody wants to use. But in our case, and now I'm a smaller business, but I would say for the clients that have applied this way of thinking, if you can get the analog version right first, that means spreadsheets, Google Docs, SharePoint, or whatever else you're using that's like the Frankenstein version of what you're doing that seems to work. Great. Then once you've got that, you can start thinking through, well, now how can there be some software that might be multiple places off the shelf? And is there someone like a Savas that can help broker the relationship to put it all together and develop some sort of MVP that can give us an idea before we start investing in hundreds of millions of dollars for one piece of software that's not flexible? Do we have something as an MVP we can put in place that we can say, oh, you know what? This is actually giving us some really good traction and results. Now we can justify the investment. That is what you did for me.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there's two threads there. I'll start with one that I'm thinking through, and it's specific to your experience and how I'm aware. We haven't gone through the boot camp. I think we will one day, but we haven't gone through
certain elements at times you've gone through.
Yeah. And we're intimately familiar with the notion of it, and what I think your product or service, I would say, like experience, right, really teases out at times as well are the relationships between different folks internally and how certain roles and responsibilities, and we've discussed this in the past. I'm curious, as you weigh a digital transformation or product or tool, as we spoke about, weighing that versus hiring an actual person to potentially solve that problem. What is that sort of trade-off been, especially in the organizations that you seek out? I'm assuming there's certainly some person that needs to be the evangelist for the product or the owner of that product in some way. But I'm curious if you've seen the binary where the decision comes down to a piece of software or hiring for a role.
And just to clarify your question, or do you mean like there's a customer problem or internal problem or opportunity that's something that software could solve versus having someone play the role of that solution? Or do you mean having someone managing the software?
Yeah, I think it could be both, but
Okay.
I'm thinking more of the notion of that sliding spectrum of scale of the investment in products and tools in the digital space that can help transform and potentially create efficiencies, and then not leaning as much into that and assuming that hiring more, hiring folks can potentially reap similar benefits.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to keep going back to the same point that I tell all my clients. And that is, if you're looking at the value that the organization creates from end to end, from the moment your customer says, hey, I have a problem, and you can solve it, all the way to thank you very much, you've solved my problem. You look at that from end to end and all the components of that whole value stream that you're currently doing from an analog perspective that are working, you can actually do a capacity study or a theoretical capacity study and say, okay, well, if I have a lot of my teams and people doing data entry, for example, and that's something that software can take off their plate because I'd rather use their creativity, or I'd rather use their ability to create relationships or any other things that human beings are still to this very moment better than AI even doing, then you get to outline areas within your value stream that technology can then help you build more capacity in the areas that you need, right? And I think that is across the board, and there's every single industry you can see this. Even if you look at even as recently as Uber, like everyone's talking about, well, it's just so easy. You get on your phone and you can hail a cab. I'll still take a yellow cab who's got a really great personality and doesn't blast their music and all those kind of things over an Uber. But what I like about Uber is that the higher chances of me finding someone like that because there's a rating system in place, right? So looking at that type of analogy, it's again going back to the analog, which is the customer's looking for a good experience and they're looking for the ability to quickly find a cab, right? And I think this is where technology has come in and said, well, we can enable in this way, but there are some elements to what Uber does and many other companies that the digital can only take you so far, and then the analog, you still have to think about that. Make sure you embed that in how you run your business.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And the other thread I was thinking through is a bit more related to, I think we've largely talked a little bit about, improvements within organization, which is, again, I think a lot of, your experience there as well, and what your experience teases out. I think in your case here and us working together, we were very much creating a digital transformation that is client facing or very integral to your business. What would you say for others that are considering those sorts of investments on that in many ways could hinge on someone's success as an executive or their business in many ways? What sort of research did you do in the process of making that leap, and what sort of advice could you give others that are considering something that would have such impact on the client facing portion of things?
Honestly, I applied a systems engineering mindset to this. I thought, like, to your point, it's a problem to solve. And I think anyone and you don't have to be an engineer to think this way in any respect, in any engineering discipline.
Sure.
But if you look at it like you want to try something new, right? The saying that I always go by is the secret to the many is the solution to the one. So if you can figure out a way to prototype it, and for me, it was really very lucky that I work with a client I've had for many years, and they were heavily interested in having this experience go virtual because they saw over the course of time where they stopped running our sessions, there was a change in culture, which to me was really flattering. What it meant is for all the new hires that were coming in, for those who were not now coming into the office anymore, there were aspects to their culture which had kept them as a competitive advantage, and now we're slipping. And so our offering was helping with maintaining that awareness and that mindset. So again, going back to thinking about it like that, I think, again, the key is how do you get key individuals in the business thinking through where they're adding their value, number one. And I think probably the longer term problem that you want to solve, don't just, again, I'm gonna go back to, don't immediately think of it like, oh, there's some technology here that's going to solve all these problems, right? And I know to some degree you're like, well, that's kind of not our wheelhouse, but it is, because you helped me think through a lot of things before actually building anything. There were a lot of rabbit holes that I easily could have gone down, and we would have built out something that wouldn't work. But what I loved about, again, our partnership is that same thing I do with my customers, which is figure out how to build an MVP and one of the ladies on your team, Maddie, was great about this. What she said is, Michael, we can go and build everything custom, and that's going to put the cost right through the roof, and we don't even know how this is going to perform. Right. So by me partnering with a client I had over many years and explaining to them, look, I'm building this out for the first time. I'd like to prototype it with you. I'd love to get your feedback. And just, going by the mantra of the reward is in pressing record, we started building things, and I think you pulled on things that already had been built so it wouldn't be so labor intensive for you. And we got that MVP up and running, and it was not what I wanted at all. And that is exactly why it evolved into exactly what I wanted, was because we were able to start with something that wasn't so expensive, but started to give me a really good idea as to what we did want. And there were things we had no idea in terms of this project and how it would go. It was just by building something and getting that kind of first build or MVP that allowed us to say, okay, I think we're onto something, right? And then that iterative design that we had working with you and your flexibility around that, and the flexibility of the client that we had selected to implement this, was amazing. And it brought the product to a very mature phase very quickly because of that iterative design process.
Yeah, I think, just thinking through the selection process and, being able for us to forge this partnership, I do think there, to give you some accolades as well. You mentioned that you think have a little bit of an engineering mindset. I think that was in some ways important, integral into your ability to kind of see through, as you put here, see through the maybe what's good enough is a good step to the ideal or to what you would want. I'm curious, just sharing a little bit of your sort of technical acumen. How important is that to others, others that might be watching this in the audience that maybe don't come with that sort of mindset? How can they embody that, and how do you feel that served you well in this process and in the selection process?
That's such a good question. It's hard because it's funny. I was talking to a client, or past client we worked with in the early 90s. He worked for Bank of America, and he now works for another company, and we're just talking about how we can partner together. And one of the things he said, he's like, Michael, going through your offering is like that scene in the Matrix when Neo is sitting there with Morpheus, and he's like, you're gonna take the blue or red pill. He's like, thanks a lot. I now see the Matrix, and it's all I can see, and it's really, I just want to not see it sometimes. And the reason I say that is because, like, when you start thinking this way, whether you be like a software engineer or a electrical engineer, or if you're in engineering physics, it doesn't matter. It's just a way of thinking. I'm going to tell you this, though. It absolutely helps. I would encourage everyone listening to this that at some point in your career, if you haven't already, just, get into some course or something that teaches you about systems engineering and just that thinking. And here's the cool part too. You can apply it to both technical and non-technical problems. And that's just a side note. But in terms of answering your question, it absolutely helped. But I'll give credit to your team as well. You guys are very systematic, which I was immediately impressed with in our initial call. I think, Ben, it was yourself, me, and Chris. And I was like, okay, how do you guys work? And I talked to you about my history, and I talked to you about, the level of investment that I was willing to make and all those kind of things. And you answered all the questions I needed. I could see you empathized with my situation and the amount of, worry that I had. But ultimately, you were very transparent around what the journey looked like and the handoffs. It's not one of those scenarios with a small development firm, which you used to be, I know you're not anymore, but where you're like, oh, well, does that mean you, Ben, are going to be working with me every day? It's like, well, no, I'm handing off to a team member, but I didn't feel like I lost touch with you. I don't feel like you weren't in the loop of what was going on with me. And more importantly, you clearly identified what the steps were and what the process was. So then I wasn't like 3 weeks in being like, okay, so what's going on now? And, kind of, sorry for anyone who's in the legal space. It's like when you have a lawyer and you get billed those billable hours and you're like, sorry, what were you doing during those hours? I didn't feel that with you guys. I felt great because I was very clear with what the project was, what the sprint was what was happening in the sprint. And there were times I'm like, oh, Savas, if we don't get this piece in before the next prototype, it's going to fail. And you're like, well, we technically didn't have it part of that sprint, but since it's critical, here's what we're going to do. We're going to remove this and put this in. And then we were able to work it out somehow, and so that whole journey of the software you used for collaborating, I think it was a teamwork and Airtable for me to make changes on my own. I felt like I had this level of customization at my fingertips. That whole journey, I mean, I can't imagine anyone not having that kind of feeling. Because if you don't, I mean, I can imagine it's very frustrating. So that's the best way I can answer that question.
Yeah. So Michael, I'm sure everybody now is getting to know you a bit more. Obviously, we've worked together. You're certainly a very technical person. You're capable. You're smart. A lot of people that are listening right now might think, oh, well, why didn't he go and do that on his own and just get a freelance partner, a CTO? Why go with an agency partner? Right? I know the answer to that, but maybe you could tell them.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, definitely was considering both from the beginning, but decided to go down the path of hiring a CTO. I was thinking about it long term. I was like, this would be great to have someone internal that could kind of maintain all these projects so I don't have to be so heavily involved, right? Like that was ultimately the idea. And so I think kind of one of the mistakes I made was a few things that may or may not have worked out, who knows at this point, but I took the first person that was familiar with my offering, that showed interest, and brought him in-house and said, okay, here's our objective. Was familiar with bootcamp, had run it before, and just lack of alignment, I guess, or whatnot, just didn't work out the way I was hoping it would have, especially because the client that we were partnering with at the time, we were promising certain development points, right? Or milestones, I guess is a better way of putting it. And we weren't meeting those milestones. And it was really embarrassing because up to this point, with at least my experience in the business has been whenever customers were asking and we're making promises, we're exceeding expectations. So this whole notion of, hey, I'm sorry, it's not working out, didn't fly with me. So I think we got to that point where I was like, and we were custom. So our CTO had also pretty detailed knowledge of the actual of coding himself. He was an engineer.
Sure.
And so I was like, okay, you're going to probably hire a team, and whether it be internal or external, this team will come together and we'll help build this product out. And it didn't work out for multiple reasons. So that was at the point where I was like, okay, I'm spending more time managing the person who's supposed to be managing this for me, so that I can be focused on business development, which is what most CEOs are doing. And instead, what I'm doing is I'm micromanaging, right? And I don't want to have to do that. And so at that point, I'm like, okay, I need a team that does this all the time, that understands what my goal is here, or mission, and then I can partner with in a way where I can leave it with them and feel confident that they're going to be able to meet the dates that they promise, right? That was ultimately the decision.
Yeah, and I think our work together, and continuing to iterate on the experience with you as well, and just, I don't know, looking ahead, let's thinking through, not only, I mean, obviously we've been engaged in business and in partnership here for some time now, but we're looking ahead and how the digital transformation, the foundation, maybe that digital transformation foundation for you, what's next, and what has this opened your eyes to, or talk a little bit about the future at Tatham Company.
Sure. So the original product that we built together, we've now got it to a point where we're refining it, right? Like it's now, like, it's really working well. So I'm now at a point where I'm able to transfer that to a client so they can run it. And so I can start to think about, now that the demand is going through the roof, I'm thinking, okay, how do I get more customers up and running with this virtual experience as well, so that we can have multiple sessions running simultaneously, right? So there's something. And then another fun one, like it all comes out of when you build something, right? All these other opportunities and design elements. But like, how can we capture data to show about how they're using it and like all that other stuff? So what it's done though is really broken open this kind of product development rhythm, I think, almost to some degree. Whereas before it used to be thinking about, okay, how do we get in front of the customer? How do we facilitate things? And very often, human beings, we can be flexible. As a facilitator, I can go in and listen to a customer say something and then say, okay, well, I think we should go down this path. And then I can almost develop a product on the spot, right? And so what I love about thinking about it from a digital perspective, and what this whole endeavor has done, is say, okay, what are the things that are going to help me really scale? I can't be in 50 places at once, but at the same time, how do I get that same value that I get to the customer, but using technology so I can scale myself, but also still have that human element? And so that's really what it's done for us, is it's been able to have us look at all parts of our business, from sales, fulfillment, and service, and say, where can technology really help us scale? And then where do we put our resources in where technology maybe isn't as effective, right? I mean, technology is effective in multiple ways, but there is that, again, that human element. And in our business, trust is super important. So there is no real kind of application that's going to build trust, if you will, especially in our business, since it's so relationship based. So that really helped us. And so now it's like, I felt like the last year and a half has been pure product development. Yeah. Because just customers are saying, well, we're loving this. Can you do this? And I'm like, do I want to do that? Is that something that will add value? Does it line up with our vision and mission and values? And if it does, then sure, let's explore it together. And so that's really what it's done, is it's created this rhythm of product development in our business, which has given us a level to scale at, but also to solve problems that I think our customers have had over the years that we've never been able to help them with.
Yeah, that's great. And I think we're coming up close to time, and I'll bring Mark in here a second. I want to make sure just as people are watching, we'll get to question and answer here shortly, but any parting shots at large for digital transformation, and those that might be watching, that they should consider if they've been inspired by your conversation, of any homework for them, any lessons, quick elevator pitch on that in terms of what to consider, what to look out for, that you can offer in going through this process. Yeah.
There's a few, actually. The first one, and maybe many of you won't fall into the same trap I did, was when you have a sense of urgency to solve a problem, don't just jump to the first solution that presents itself, right? And it's funny because a big component, or a big part of the foundation of our offering, is really not to jump to solutions. And here I am, not eating my own cooking to some degree, but I mean, it happens, right? And so I think in this sense, with the time frame, with COVID hitting, with all our customers being shut down from running the residential setting, we're still doing the virtual coaching, but finding how difficult it's going to be, I was like, oh, I need a solution quickly. When the first thing presented itself, I'm like, I latched onto it, because I was like, oh, it's not going to get better than this. It just sounds so perfect. So the first recommendation I would have is to watch webinars like this, read forums, get your head into, what the critical success factors are for something like this. That would be my first piece of advice. Sure. The second one would be that while spend a good amount of time writing up your storyboard for the vision for what, at least in that moment, what you think that digital transformation could look like. Because there's nothing worse than, I think, and I did this in the early stages, and then your team came back and asked me these questions. So maybe you do that anyways, but it's like, sit down in a quiet room with your iPad or your pencil and paper, or whatever it is, and say, okay, this is the current scenario we're in, and what is the vision for the future of what this digital transformation could look? What's the output? Like, if you're a customer and you're your own customer, how are you feeling and how are you interacting? And it could even be like using adjectives, but what does that look like? So I think I would have liked to have spent more time up front, even before selecting you guys. I just got lucky in that you helped me through that as well. I really don't anticipate, at least from what I've heard, a lot of firms do what you do in terms of helping through that. But I would definitely come up with a storyboard, and just say, this is kind of what it'll feel like. Because I think that'll help. I don't know if you agree, but I think that would really help whatever developer you partner with. It'll help them also better understand kind of where you're trying to go. That'd be the second. And the third thing is the one that I think everyone's heard multiple times. It goes back to that, the reward is in pressing record. Don't get frozen by analysis paralysis. Like, get into it, start building things. Obviously be cost conscious because you could very quickly rack up the bill. But at the same time, really start to build. There were a lot of things we built that I'm like, oh, that actually didn't work very well. But what it did do is it helped us kind of launch into something else that was phenomenal. And so you'll never get those phenomenals until you see the things you don't want, right? So I think that's the other thing, is be willing to experiment with, whether it be internal or external. Be willing, find a partner that's willing to experiment with you, who shares that notion of iterative design, and then set your own milestones. I think those would be the piece of advice I would give.
It's great advice. Mark, I want to bring you back in. I'm excited to see what the audience has in terms of questions. And yeah, I appreciate the time too, Mike.
Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, absolutely. Love talking about this. It was a big moment for our firm. So totally my pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks both for a wonderful discussion. We do have some questions that we're going to ask. So we're going to pop out of this format into just a normal, floating heads to talk on Zoom. So we'll see you in just a sec for some questions. All right. Well, Ben, Michael, thanks again for that talk. We have a Q&A session just kind of listed out and ready to go now. We did have a few questions that were submitted beforehand, so I've got a handful that we'll work through there. Just a reminder for anybody on the call today, if you do have any questions, maybe follow-up question based off an answer, feel free to use the Q&A section here in Zoom. So first one, I'll just bring up for both Ben and Michael here. What kind of mental math do you do to help you confirm that an idea for digital transformation is worth the investment?
That's a good one. You want me to start, Ben, or do you want to take that?
Yeah, you go first.
I'm not a very good mathematician. I'm probably not a good person to answer this question, but I'll try to do my best, because I'm more of your typical entrepreneur of ask for forgiveness versus permission. But so yeah, you definitely have to, kidding aside, you definitely have to think about the investment that you're going to make. But I think you also have to look at the cost of an action. I know that's kind of vague, and maybe your predicament's not exactly the same as mine, but for me, it's like I either am able to reach clients during this pandemic in this way, and then I could look at how much lost revenue I would have. So when I looked at that, I'm like, I have no problem. I didn't even spend half of that investing in this platform. So
right.
I'm like, is that worth the risk? Well, completely, right? But at the same time, you don't want to be like taking out, second mortgages and stuff like that, or if you're a large organization putting a huge investment forward, that
sure.
You definitely. Yeah. I guess what I'm trying to say is you definitely have to look at that. But if you have a customer pain point, and go back to this, you have a customer pain point that you're able to solve, and then if you're lucky enough, like I was, to be able to at least choose one to partner with, to say, hey, I'd like to help you solve this problem, and you could develop this platform or the software to help do that, then you can, it's not a matter of is it going to be a return, it definitely will be a return. It's just a matter of when. So
yeah, I think I'd answer the question, and it's more indicative of the experience of having conversations with entrepreneurs like yourself. We're going through quite a few discovery phases right now with a few entrepreneurs that have ideas and are kind of in this boat. And I think, to me, the question is a bit loaded in terms of the word investment, what that entails. I think the best way that we approach problems from our perspective with entrepreneurs in these sorts of kind of infant stages of understanding the pursuit of an idea or how much to invest in it is more so of understanding the paths that are available, right? And so I think there's a little bit of a misnomer with either kind of bootstrapping yourself all on your own, or completely hiring paying top dollar for the idealistic MVP or V1 that you have in your brain, right? And I think there's different paths forward, more so now than ever, of being able to create clickable prototypes, get feedback, make incremental progress, and whether that's your pursuit of further funding to realize certain goals for yourself or otherwise, or whether it's kind of getting that feedback to make the product better or experience better. I think it's more so the shift of, the mental math would be what incremental investments are you willing to make, whether that's your time, money, right, or any combination thereof, to see returns that can be fruitful, and then be okay with trying some things that might not work, but you learn from them along the way as well.
Yeah, could I just add something to that, because that's absolutely right. I love your answer. So the piece that I'll just highlight for what Savas did, and whoever's listening to this is critical. So when we first engaged, I said, look, I'm not about to invest more than X, right? So is this something you can do? And I asked every other firm, and what I got was a dance around from most of the firms. Well, yeah. I'm like, if you can't give me a solid answer on that, I'm not engaging you. And so you got a few developers on a second call. And so you shared my story with them. They got super excited, and then they started to live brainstorm ideas on ways we could keep the cost super low within budget, but also get a proof of concept that could get me excited and a customer excited to say, great, now we can take it to the next level. So I think that's kind of what you're saying and what we did. And I don't know what the technical, I think Google had a whole lot of like packages. I don't know what they're called, but they have like visual packages that you can pull that have already been designed. So you wouldn't take your team like 100 hours to like custom design something in colors that I might not even like. And so it wasn't like perfect, but it was like good enough that it looked good and professional. And then if I wanted to, I could change the colors, and it was cost effective, right? So there's really, like, I think that's what you're saying. There's really innovative ways you can do things to keep the cost down and then keep within your budget.
Right.
So I've got another question that was submitted here. I'd love to get both your take on. Where specifically do you think business leaders should be looking, both inside and outside of their organizations, for inspiration on digital transformation ideas?
Yeah, I'll start with this one. So I'm always a big advocate of customer. So going back to, are you solving a customer problem? But then I should be fair that there's two different, from my perspective, internal and external. You may have something that you're trying to increase efficiency of that's internal as well. So I would say stakeholders are also important. But again, customers are great because they're the ones that pay you, and they're the ones that can help fund all of this. Whether you're a big corporation or small, that's the revenue target, right? So I think that for inspiration on digital ideas, the one disservice I think that you could probably have would be trying to look what everyone else is doing. And you may disagree with this, but I'm going to say it's not a good idea. It's almost like I'm a new parent. I'm not a new parent. I just had, my daughter was born just about 2 weeks ago. And it's like, I have 3 kids, and the worst thing you can do as a parent, and I do it every time, is just like a sucker. I go onto Google and I Google things. There's so much information, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm the worst parent in the world because I'm reading all this information. It's funny, but you can get some really good ideas and things from just like a small circle of people. And also your customers, like, get on Savas, again, you did this really well. Get on to having conversations with your customers and saying, well, talk to me about your problems. What are you currently doing about that? Is that a high priority for you? Like, really get intimate with your customer. And then suddenly you're going to be like, oh my gosh, I have so many ideas for digital products now. I got to sort them out and figure out which ones I'm going to prioritize now. So I think that's definitely a big one. And then your internal team and your stakeholders as well. If there's some sort of software or digital solution that's going to like really dramatically increase productivity, you can actually do the mental math on that one pretty quickly. If I'm spending X amount of hours doing this by hand, writing in this data or in a spreadsheet, and this can do it in 5 seconds and it takes them 50 hours, do the math, so I think those inspirations can come both internal and external.
Yeah. I mean, my answer would be similar. I think regardless of whether we're performing, our engineering services or from a design perspective, I think, one of the mantras that we have here is user-centered design. And so I think, keeping the user in mind along the way, it's sometimes the goals of the user are at odds with the goals for the business. And there are things that are healthy. There's a healthy sort of kind of push and pull there. I had my past life was in advertising, where I was working on projects that were digital in nature, very much wanting to engage with consumers for what might be identified as less than ideal user experiences to be able to gain attention. And I think that when you're able to provide an experience that a user or a consumer, when they don't feel like they're being sold to, when you feel like you're actually helping them out in some way and listening to them, those are the best. Those are all the success stories of any number of corporations or startups that have turned into corporations over the years of having user-centered design. So I would say inspiration there. So regardless for any project that we work on, whether user testing is a part of it or not, we at the very least within Slack or otherwise like to share our designs internally to get feedback, just even if people are outside of the project, to whether it's a design decision or an architectural decision of how we're organizing content or other things like that, just to get that feedback and not do that in a vacuum with the client specifically or us as experts per se. We're experts because we have an open mind to understanding what the motivations are for the user and try to get as much data and feedback as we can on that.
Yeah, I think we also did like a tabletop with you. Pretty sure we did. It was a while ago now. But we did a tabletop where we just like mapped out very high level what the experience could look like.
Right.
And then I was able to go back to customers and then highlight what are the key aspects of our face-to-face experience that were the most profound for them. And then how do we embed those in a digital environment? And then we started brainstorming. And some of the original ideas we had were like, I look back and I'm like, that was the most ridiculous thing. But they got us thinking about other solutions that we never would have before if we hadn't put it on the table. So I think another thing is to do some sort of tabletop exercise where you can simulate what it could potentially look like. And I know you guys have a lot of software too that can do that, but that's fine. I found that helpful.
Yeah, I remember specifically in our engagement, you had a kind of catalog of video content, of the experience itself. And that was, even us engaging during COVID times, it's not like we could go out there and experience that on site with you, right? There was a lot of barriers to even understanding the experience. True. Ideally, if we were to do it all over again and, in a different time horizon, we would have been there with notepads. We would have been like watching and studying and interviewing and understanding how to translate this into a digital experience. But we sort of had to do that with some of the content that you already had, which I think was helpful in watching some of those videos of seeing organizations go through the process, even if it was sort of vignettes of those. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've got one last question here before we wrap up. And this one is maybe a future looking. Where do you see opportunities within your business or other businesses for digital transformation moving forward?
Ben, do you want to start on that one?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, opportunities within our business, I think within our business specifically, there's a lot of, not to get too meta. I mean, you brought up AI in the call. I think there's aspects of AI that's sort of creeping into the creative space. And I know you'd mentioned too of kind of what AI can do well, the human doing more of the creativity. I think that's, with some of the new tools that have been out there, both from a copy and art standpoint, you can make the argument that the AI is getting closer to catching up. And this is not to insinuate that the opportunity for transforming our services is indicative of involving AI, but I do think there are interesting ways of thinking how our space specifically will evolve with AI being able to perhaps program or develop textures or making more efficiencies gained maybe in the engineering and sort of design realms. I think it's plenty far off, but these are the things that I think about on being on the cutting edge, working with folks that share out, quite a few of the latest trends. Those are the things that that come to mind, top of mind for me specifically. maybe that's more fear-based of, oh, the robots are coming for our jobs. But I'm curious to hear your answer to the question.
I think I mentioned this to Chris at one point where I was like, oh, well, maybe, because we have like just we have a production floor within our business simulator where you're building something. And so one of the decisions we made that was hard, but turned out turned out good, was that since we didn't have people sitting down and using their hands and making something, that we would have a simulated but input output oriented production floor that could change based on decisions you're making. And so we were trying to explore like virtual reality, and like I have a VR headset and I've kind of used it. I'm a pilot, so I do some simulations in there and stuff. But I was like, originally I was like, oh man, this is like, it's kind of new. It makes me a little bit dizzy. Do I see, 13, 14 plus participants that are senior executives strapping these things on their heads, wandering around their offices? I don't know, maybe. But we didn't take that path. It's still up in the air. But one thing that we did do is we started looking at augmented reality, because there is a physical kind of component to our offering. And so using augmented reality gives you a different dimension, especially in the learning process. So we started exploring some of those things. But again, doing it in front of a small subset of clients, and and prototyping on a smaller scale to see what their responses are and if it enhances the experience. But here's the biggest thing that actually for us that broke through for digital transformation is hybrid. So a lot of things that I know a lot of businesses now all over the world are coming back to face-to-face. And you're like, oh, well, good. So you have options now. You can use our digital or you can use our face-to-face. And I'm like, no, we're putting them together. There's so many great things about the digital space that can make the face-to-face much more fun. And so we've really ramped up our hybrid environments, and clients are loving it, and to some degree, one of the ideas we had was actually my wife gave me this idea. We have on our digital experience, we're like, how do we get something tangible? So what we did is we mailed out the actual physical products at various stages of production and put them in envelopes, and then during the session told them to open the envelopes so they could have something physical in their hands during the digital experience, right? So it's amazing. There's so many other things you can do. And then you get to a point where it's like, again, you have this rhythm and you're like, we have so many ideas. Then it's like, how do you prioritize those? And I think that will continue to be kind of the mantra around our firm, is continuing to innovate, but at the same time, always thinking about the customer lens, being customer centric, and then starting things on a small scale and prototyping them to see if they work well. So that's the future for me. It's really exciting, actually.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Ben, Michael, thank you again one last time for just taking the time today to both answer some of these questions just now, but also just walking through this overall discussion on digital transformation. It's been a really great experience for me just to sit and listen to the both of you talk through it. There's obviously a lot of experience baked into the answers that you had. I'd like to wrap everything up now by just giving a quick note to anybody on the call that we have recorded this conversation. We will be sending it out later for anybody who wants to watch through it again, go into any of the specific notes that we covered here today, along with a few other resources for anybody who is looking to take the information that they learned here today and implement it, put it into action. And if you do have a project in mind, something that you're looking to potentially build out a little bit more of, please consider Savas Labs for that. We started out our work with Michael and Tatham Company through a discovery session, and we can do something very similar for you. So thank you again for everybody who attended here today. And again, to Ben and Michael, have a great one.